Leo perched on a low stone wall near the bustling downtown plaza, the dusk sky glowing a hazy orange that reflected off countless glass windows. He was as unassuming as any street performer might be. A worn charcoal suit, a size too big at the shoulders, a narrow-brimmed hat tilted forward, and a deck of frayed playing cards within easy reach. It was his lively grin, however, that usually charmed passers-by into stopping for a moment's entertainment. He would talk, gesture, and snap his hands in a well-practiced flourish, making cards vanish and coins appear. Yet there was something about his manner, an undercurrent of nervous energy. Most nights, tourists swept by with amused smiles, sometimes dropping a few coins into his worn top hat. This evening, as deep shadows stretched across the sidewalk, Leo felt unusually uneasy. It was an unsettling sense that his illusions might be more than cheap parlour tricks. His street corner was a coveted spot for buskers, lodged between a popular cafe and the entrance to the subway station. While office workers hurried home, some paused, curious about the street performer whose crowd seemed entranced. They gathered in a small semicircle, forming a pocket of expectation. Leo cleared his throat and slipped a hand into his pocket to grasp a thin silver coin. It was time to captivate. With dramatic flair, he tossed the coin upward. It shimmered beneath the streetlight, then vanished. Usually he'd follow up by pulling it from behind a lady's ear or from an unsuspecting onlooker's jacket pocket. Tonight, however, when he felt for the coin's smooth surface under his fingertips, he couldn't find it at all. A hush fell over him, so complete that he almost forgot the audience waiting for him to produce a punchline. Must have slipped through another dimension, Leo joked stiffly, though the world seemed to anchor in place around him, breathless. He offered a winsome grin, rummaging in his pockets as part of the act. Or maybe it's behind your ear, he teased a tall man with thick framed glasses in the front row. He tried to execute the move, right hand hides coin, left hand reveals it, but there was no coin to reveal. The tall man frowned, uncertain if he was missing the trick's subtlety. Leo shrugged and forced an apologetic chuckle. "Well, that is magic for you," he said, wishing his voice didn't sound so hollow. The spectators broke into polite applause, though more out of awkwardness than awe. As they dispersed, the tall man shook his head, clearly unimpressed by the show's abrupt end. Leo stood there, gripping the deck of cards, heart pounding unexpectedly. He'd done at least 100 of these illusions, repeating them in every variant possible. Having an item go missing mid-performance wasn't entirely uncommon, but something about this instance felt more significant, like a secret door had been left ajar. He glanced around to see if anyone else sensed the strangeness that bristled in the air. Soon the street lamp above him flickered. Startled, Leo looked up at the sudden change in light, half expecting it to blink off altogether. Instead, the flicker repeated twice, bathing the sidewalk in an erratic strobe that made the evening appear to shimmer ominously. In the sputter of luminescence, he glimpsed something out of the corner of his eye, something that looked inky black, shaped vaguely like a silhouette. When the lamp steadied itself again, the figure was gone. Leo's chest constricted with an anxious thrill. It was impossible to articulate, but he could have sworn someone had stood there, holding his coin. He collected his things and decided it was time to head home. The tip money was decent enough for a late dinner, but he couldn't shake the sense that the night's performance was only an opening act for something larger. His small, cramped apartment was only a short walk away, tucked into a grey 5-story building that leaned precariously against its neighbours. He hurried through the city streets, more eager than usual to return to the faint comfort of his living space. As he walked, he heard faint footsteps echoing his own. It was a busy part of town, so footsteps alone wouldn't be cause for alarm, but the footfalls seemed too precisely matched to his pace. Leo stopped and pivoted. The sidewalk behind him lay mostly empty, except for a few distant stragglers. No one was close enough to be mimicking his steps. A jolt of paranoia tightened his throat. He quickened his pace and forced himself not to look back again. He breathed a sigh of relief when he reached his building's front door. The ancient lock always took some coaxing, but he managed to wrestle it open with a sharp clank. He climbed the creaky stairwell, passing chipped paint and the faint hum of a neighbour's television. Inside his unit, he flicked on a single overhead bulb that cast a dull yellow glow. He hung up his hat, collapsed onto his threadbare couch, and let out a heavy exhalation. One more day of illusions that masked the fact that his real dream performing on a grand stage was nowhere in sight. Street magic was an exhausting hustle, and he wondered if maybe it was time to give it up. Yet the notion would no sooner emerge than he'd feel a pang of regret. Magic was all he had. Suddenly recalling this evening's bizarre misfire with the coin, he rummaged in his pockets to count the night's intake. Yet when he opened his hands, his eyes widened. The coins in his possession shimmered differently, like they had been polished to a mirror-like shine. He fanned them out across the coffee table. Each bore a strange symbol he'd never seen before. Something akin to a spinning vortex or swirl carved into the metal. This design certainly hadn't been there when he collected them. He gingerly touched the raised swirl, surprised to find that it felt ice-cold against his skin. A low, vibrating hum filled the room, as if some invisible engine had spurred to life. The overhead light flickered dramatically. Adrenaline shot through Leo so harshly that he flinched. The coins glowed with a faint bluish aura. He held his breath. Then the illumination winked out, leaving the room swallowed by darkness. For a moment, he sensed his apartment shifting, as though the walls briefly rippled. He clamped his eyes shut and pressed a palm to his temple, trying to steady himself. When he reopened them, everything was normal again. The overhead light was back on, the room was quiet, and there was no... But the coins still bore that strange marking. A powerful curiosity drove him to examine them closer. He rubbed at the markings, hoping they were some novelty etched by a playful artisan. The symbol refused to fade. Irritated, he flicked one coin onto the table, and it landed with an unsettling clang, as though landing on a surface far more resonant than cheap laminate. Almost immediately, he felt the coin pulling? It was a surreal sensation, as if the metal had some gravitational field. The swirling emblem seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Finally, after a moment of hesitation, Leo lifted one coin and tossed it in the air, just as he would in a magic trick. To his shock, instead of flipping once or twice, the coin spun endlessly, hanging suspended at eye level. Its swirl began to rotate faster and faster, becoming a tiny vortex. There was a flash of blue light, and Leo found himself no longer in his shabby apartment. He stood in a dimly lit alleyway, but it was not the one outside his building. Strange neon symbols lit the distant skyline, and the pavement underfoot was spiked with rivulets of red liquid that coursed like capillaries. A briny tang hung in the air, reminiscent of metal and sea salt. The corners of the alley extended into shadowy labyrinths. The architecture appeared contorted, as though time and space had twisted them into unfamiliar angles. Where am I?" he muttered, voice trembling with disbelief. He clutched the coin in his trembling hand, its edges painfully cold. Before he could gather his bearings, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A shifting mass of darkness slithered across the far end of the alley, reminding him of the silhouette he'd glimpsed earlier beneath the street lamp. The figure paused. A pair of glimmering red eyes emerged from the black mist. Leo's nerves tensed. Without any rational plan, he sprinted in the opposite direction, weaving through the labyrinth of alleys until the creature's presence faded. At some point he stumbled onto a road lined with what looked like abandoned market stalls. They were stacked with bizarre objects. Bottles that fizzed with colourless liquid, cages that rattled with unseen creatures, and trinkets shaped like living eyes. A wooden sign overhead was painted with looping, indecipherable runes. Everything felt simultaneously alien and malicious. "Hello?" he called out, though he regretted it instantly. His voice echoed through the deserted street, a mocking sound in the cold silence. The neon lights overhead flickered, reminiscent of the street lamp's glitch back home, and he heard a wheezing whistle from behind one of the stalls. When he crept closer, he discovered a hunched figure wearing a tattered cloak. The figure lifted a pale, bony hand in greeting. "You're here," said a rasping voice. "At last, the brute force of your illusions has ripped the seal wide open. Welcome." Welcome. Leo swallowed hard. Where am I? What is this place? Between worlds, the figure replied with a half-smile. You tore open the boundary when your illusions became truly magical. It's not often we get new arrivals, though. The figure tilted its head. I can sense you have no idea what you've done. Leo felt exposed, every hair on his body prickling. I just want to go home, he managed. The hunched figure's laugh was a sickly hiss. You can, if you're willing to pay the cost. Such powerful magic doesn't come free. It demands something personal. The creature thrust out a small glass orb, swirling with black smoke. Give a piece of your essence, and you can cross back. Or you could remain and wander this realm until you're devoured by nightmares. An electric shiver of warning passed through Leo's chest. He clutched the odd coin in his hand, certain that it, too, held some significance. But I don't even know what piece you're asking for, he protested. The figure's visage twisted. Your illusions, your faith in what is unreal have opened the path. You must sacrifice your true self. A memory, a belief, a primary emotion, something that anchors you. That is the price of bridging worlds. A swirl of dread made Leo step back. I'm not giving you my memories or my emotions. There has to be another way. He turned to run, ignoring the figure's caustic screech behind him. The glare of neon lights pounded against his eyes with each frantic step. He dashed past twisted market stalls, ignoring sometimes whispered pleas or sighs in unknown languages. Eventually, he spotted what looked like a shimmering doorway at the end of a deserted avenue. He recognized the swirl upon it identical to the swirling insignia on the coins. Heart surging with renewed hope, he sprinted toward it. Before he could reach the portal, the silhouette with red eyes reappeared in his path. It unraveled from the shadows, tall and dreadful. Though it had no discernible mouth, from it emanated a deep, resonant voice that reverberated inside Leo's skull. Think you can simply run? You rip this veil. Now the illusions you conjure will bleed into the city. You will not so easily escape. Leo's instincts howled that he had to avoid confrontation. The doorway shimmered behind the creature's form. With desperate determination, Leo flung one of the bizarre coins at the silhouette. The coin spun in midair, releasing a sharp burst of light that briefly scattered the darkness. In that moment of clarity, Leo lunged past, diving headlong into the swirling portal. A sensation of free fall consumed him, and for a terrifying second he could neither see nor breathe. Then he slammed onto the wooden floor of his apartment. He sprawled there, gasping. The overhead bulb flickered softly, illuminating the clutter. For the second time, he half believed he had simply passed out or hallucinated the entire experience, but the coins scattered on the coffee table told him otherwise. And more disturbing was the presence of something akin to a glitch in the air near his window. A faint flicker of shadow layered upon itself, like a tear in reality. A figure coalesced within that flicker. Leo's throat tightened when once again he saw those piercing red eyes. The silhouette had followed him. Stay away! Leo found himself shouting, hands trembling. Adrenaline pumped through him. He fumbled in desperation for anything that might serve as a weapon. His gaze landed on the deck of playing cards on the table. Hardly lethal, but if illusions had become tangible, maybe there was a way to wield them. He snatched up the deck. The silhouette drifted toward him, intangible yet menacing. The air around it crackled with malevolence, a swirl of darkness. Leo took a deep breath, focusing on everything he practiced daily. Showmanship, misdirection, sleight of hand. These illusions had long been trivial stunts, but now they seemed to pulsate with raw potential. As the silhouette lunged forward, Leo fanned out the cards, imagining them blazing with white-hot energy. He jerked his hand forward, sending the cards slicing through the air like razor-edged projectiles. An impossible shockwave reverberated in the small apartment. The silhouette hissed, recoiling as tendrils of darkness peeled away from it. For a moment, its form lost cohesion, dissolving into wisps of black smoke. Leo staggered back, gazing at his own hands with astonishment. He had just attacked a shadowy apparition with conjured illusions made real. The cost of harnessing this power was unclear, but he had no other choice. He needed to protect himself and possibly the city from these intruders. He could sense them. More tears forming out in the night, rifts that pulsed with the same swirling energy. Once illusions became real, they birthed a malicious alternate realm, eager to seep into the fabric of everyday life. A horrifying realization dawned. The passers-by who'd witnessed his faulty trick earlier might also be drawn into this madness. The illusions might be as enticing as they were dangerous. Swiftly, he grabbed the bag he used for gigs, stuffed the coins inside, and sprinted out of his apartment. If those world-ripping tears appeared wherever people had seen his illusions, then downtown was at risk. Already, by the time he reached the stairwell, he thought he heard faint echoes of distant screams. Or was it the wail of the wind? The entire building felt like it was humming. Outside, the street was eerily deserted. Hollow neon reflections shimmered in the windows of closed shops, while a biting wind ruffled his jacket. Leo tried to gather his nerve. If illusions were real, then maybe, just maybe, he could repair the damage. It was, after all, conjuring that had opened a path. Perhaps there was a way to seal it again. He hurried toward the plaza where he usually performed. Even while blocks away, he could see a gathering of swirling lights near his old busking spot. The swirling lights arched high into the night sky. When he arrived, the scene was chaotic. The swirl had manifested at the center of the plaza, about 10 feet across, like a great, yawning door of writhing shadows. Several bystanders were huddled behind abandoned cars and lampposts, eyes wide with terror. Others were transfixed by the gateway itself, drawn forward as though under a spell. Some shapes, indefinite yet menacing, slipped in and out of the portal, exploring their new hunting ground. Leo recognized them as the same silhouettes he had glimpsed in the other realm. Ignoring his trembling legs, he rushed toward a middle-aged woman who was creeping dangerously close to the vortex. She moved in a trance, eyes glazed, lips parted in silent wonder. He caught her by the shoulders and tried to haul her back. Her face contorted in confusion as though something else was controlling her. "Snap out of it!" he yelled, gently shaking her. She blinked, eyes refocusing, and began to gasp. Panic twisted her expression. She fled, stumbling away from the swirling mass. Leo felt a surge of relief that at least one person was safe for the moment. He assessed the swirling portal. Wisps of darkness lashed outward. The silhouettes clawed their way through, the malevolence palpable. A small knot of brave onlookers tried to film the phenomenon with their phones, though their shock was evident. In their minds, maybe this was just an elaborate stunt by a particularly skilled illusionist. Leo knew better. Standing in front of the throbbing tear, he dug into his bag, retrieving more of his battered magician's tools. He pulled out colored silk scarves, plastic flowers, metal rings, props for illusions. Each item, once laughably mundane, now brimmed with potential. The swirling emblem on the coins had become a brand upon his consciousness. He shut his eyes, concentrating on these objects as vessels for the same energies he had just discovered. If illusions were now the bridging force, he needed to create a final grand trick to close the rift. The silhouettes took notice of his presence. Several advanced, forming a ragged semicircle around him. Their glowing red eyes burned with hostility. Summoning every ounce of nerve, he flicked open the metal rings and tossed them through the air. In an ordinary magic show, these rings would link and unlink in a polished demonstration of skill. But tonight, the rings soared in brilliant arcs, swirling with crackling electricity. As if drawn by a magnetic force, they snapped together in mid-air, forming a chain. Then the chain of rings expanded, spinning in rapid circles around the tear, forming a glimmering barrier. The silhouettes shrieked, recoiling from the ring cage. The swirling gateway flickered under the sudden assault. Leo staggered, sweat dripping down his neck. Holding that kind of energy in place was draining. He felt something inside him tear, like a muscle being overextended, but still he pressed on. While the silhouettes were momentarily driven back, he hurled the silk scarves next, imagining them as radiant ribbons that would sew the rift together. One after another, the scarves darted upward, weaving through the spinning rings like living snakes. The swirling shadows hissed angrily, resisting. Black tendrils lashed out, trying to tear holes in the growing tapestry of light. The silhouettes lunged at Leo, forcing him to dodge for his life. He scrambled sideways, fumbling for his final prop, a battered wand. He'd never used it much on the street, as it felt too cliched, but it had once belonged to his grandfather. Leo clung to the memory of his grandfather teaching him to palm coins when he was just 7. He recalled the wonder in his old man's eyes. Magic is real. His grandfather had once said, "Because you believe it is." Holding fast to those words, Leo pointed the wand at the swirling vortex and poured his resolve into it. The shimmering umbrella of illusions glowed brighter. The ribbons of light twisted together, forming a luminous seal. The silhouettes shrieked, battered from within, trying to keep the portal open. Leo ground his teeth, tears stinging his eyes as he poured every shred of hope and conviction he had into restoring the world's boundary. With a thunderous crack, the chain of rings clanged, and a final burst of brilliance erupted from where the scarves converged. The swirling tear buckled inward, imploding in a vortex of dark energy. When the glow subsided, the plaza lay quiet. A stunned hush fell upon the trembling onlookers. The silhouettes were gone, leaving only faint wisps of shadow that dissipated in the wind. The street lamps seemed to return to normal, casting a steady, reassuring light across the concrete. Leo, panting and nauseated from the magical exertion, collapsed onto his knees. Slowly, people emerged from hiding. Murmurs arose. Was that part of the show? Did you record that? It couldn't be real, could it? Yet the crowd was too shaken to simply applaud. An older woman approached quietly. Her voice trembled with concern. Whatever that was, thank you for saving us. Leo tried to answer, but his voice cracked into a shallow whisper. He looked at the place where the rift had been. A faint scar lingered in the air, nearly invisible to the eye. The illusions might return, or new portals might open. He needed to be sure it was truly sealed. Feeling an urge to check, he reached inside his bag to find the coins again. To his relief, they were all faded, the swirling symbol barely identifiable. Perhaps by using that final burst of creativity and faith, he had rendered them inert. Or maybe their magic was just dormant. Either way, they no longer glowed with sinister potential. He couldn't stay there forever. Already, a squad car had pulled up, and soon police officers would be looking for an explanation. There was none he could safely provide without sounding insane. He slipped through the disoriented crowd. Though he felt exhausted, he forced himself to stagger away before the authorities roped him into endless questions. Adrenaline still roared in his veins, accompanied by a bone-deep fatigue. His steps carried him down a side street. Uncertain where he was going, he only knew he needed to be alone, to breathe. As he passed a row of shuttered businesses, he paused, noticing the reflection in a darkened window. His silhouette stared back, eyes hollow with shock. A swirl of questions raced through his head. Was he cursed? Had his illusions placed a permanent target on his back? Could those twisted beings still access his reality? Exhaling unsteadily, he continued walking until he reached a deserted park with a single bench under a flickering lamppost. The light was calmer than the strobe that had haunted him before, so he sat, lost in thought. He toyed with a single playing card, turning it over in his hands. On one side was the usual pattern, but on the other, he swore he saw a faint swirl. Probably his imagination, though he couldn't be sure anymore. He reflected on how easily illusions had transitioned from a street act to a genuine hazard. Perhaps, he considered, illusions had always been real in the sense that a performer's confidence in them bridged a hidden gap. Maybe there were countless performers whose fleeting convictions accidentally opened portals that were too small or short-lived to cause harm. Yet somehow Leo's particular sincerity, or desperation, or brand of unwavering showmanship had severed the veil entirely. Even so, a worn-out performer from the city had managed to protect bystanders and seal the breach, for now. He raised his gaze to the night sky. The haze of light pollution blotted out most stars, rendering the sky a deep, empty purple. Instead of focusing on the emptiness, he tried to picture the swirl in his mind. He turned it into something protective rather than destructive, an emblem of possibility. Magic was real because people believed it, and he had to believe that he could still use it safely, maybe even for good. But first, he would need to learn how to control it before any new illusions spawned fresh nightmares. As he sat there on the bench, pondering a future he could never have predicted, he thought about the tall man with thick-framed glasses who'd witnessed the trick gone awry. The man likely had no idea what had happened, or that a piece of darkness had blossomed from that failed coin trick. So many unsuspecting people were bound up in this cosmic farce. Leo felt a pang of guilt, but also a flicker of determination. If illusions were real, and he had inadvertently exposed bystanders to another world, then it was his responsibility to ensure they stayed safe. He rose from the bench, slipping the playing card into his jacket pocket. Perhaps, the next time his illusions appeared, they'd take a form that would heal rather than harm. But that required him to practice, to investigate, and to push the boundaries of what he knew about conjuration. He'd need help. Maybe someone with knowledge of arcane lore, if such a person existed in the everyday throngs of the city. He refused to remain ignorant and let more tears fester. He could at least try to harness the illusions for purpose instead of chaos. A sudden breeze kicked up, ruffling the leaves of a nearby tree and tousling his hair. The lampost's light flickered faintly, as though winking in acknowledgement. This city, with its labyrinthine alleys, swirling neon signs and unending rush of life, was now layered with the memory of horrors. Yet it also bristled with hidden wonders that he had only glimpsed. Perhaps he could shape what came through those faint scars. Perhaps illusions might someday become the city's protector rather than its curse. Leo stared toward the horizon, where the silhouettes of skyscrapers rose starkly against the sky. In his mind's eye, he pictured the swirling tiers sealed shut and those malevolent figures barred from entry. Then he imagined a world shaped by illusions that brought sparks of hope rather than fear, a city where magic, real magic, served as an unexpected ally. Fire danced in his eyes. His illusions, now thoroughly exposed as real, would never be just tricks again. They gave him a reason to keep fighting. They had become truth, and it was a truth he would wield with every ounce of courage and creativity he possessed.